Hello and welcome to our first computer side chat. In this first set of notes, we're going to be looking at the concept of power. Now, this is something that we already started talking about in class. We talked about the other day, specifically your relationship with power. And we looked at that from a couple different avenues. We looked at how things like school or your parents or government hold power over you. And then on the flip side, we looked at how you have power over certain things. Say your grade or where you want to go in terms of a career in the future. Or if you have a younger sibling, you might have some amount of power over them. And so today what we want to look at is what is power? How is it maintained? How is it expressed? And how is it obtained? So let's go ahead and get right into that. So again, our main focus, or the title of these notes, will be understanding power. And our central question will boil down to this. What is power? What are sources of power? And how is power connected to legitimacy? So as we go through these notes, try to make sure that you're jotting things down that answer that question in particular. So let's start very simply. What is power? Well, for our purposes, we're going to define power as the ability to the ability to impose our will upon the behavior of other people. And so think about this from terms of government. Government wants to impose its will on people in certain ways. So speed limits are created to impose upon certain people that they only drive a certain speed in certain areas. Laws against theft are imposed to try and ensure that people don't steal. So those are some examples of ways that government uses, say, the law to impose their will upon the actions of other people. Take a look at this slide. Think about how these entities here might impose their will on you in order to influence your behavior. Someone like, say, a boss or a teacher or your parents or a police officer. All of these individuals hold power over you in some way, and all of them in some way, shape, or form look to influence your behavior through the things that they do. So let's now take a look at where power comes from. And for us, we're going to boil that down into 5 sources of power. So the first source of power that we are going to look at is called formal authority. And so formal authority is power that comes from the power holder's position and duties within an organization. So in other words, by given a title, that person gains some kind of power or influence that they would not have had without that title. So let's say, for example, if we were to use athletics, a team captain might be an example of someone that gained some kind of power by way of being granted a formal title. Same with, say, an elected official. When you are elected into office, say as a member of the Senate or a member of the House of Representatives, you are given certain power with that title. The next source of power is persuasion. And persuasion is when power flows from the power holder's ability to persuade or influence others. So in other words, my power comes from my ability to convince you to follow me, to convince you to follow my directives, and to curb your behavior based on the things that I want. And we can kind of point to several examples of this. Again, we could use the example of politicians or elected officials. I want to persuade you to vote for me based on the things that I'm going to do for you. And so I want to try and do things or say things that dictate your behavior in that way. Coaches are a similar, or in similar vein, use persuasion. You want to persuade a team as a coach to follow your lead and to buy in to whatever system or culture you're trying to impose upon a team. Third is rewards. And rewards are where power comes from the power holder's ability to give something of value, such as money, responsibility, or praise. So in other words, power is obtained through one's ability to give people something. So for example, your job. Your job has power over you because at the end of the day, they will reward you with money if you do the things that they ask. So that tends to be the type of power that your job holds over you. Generally, especially at your guys' age, if you're working, say, a fast food job or a retail job, you probably aren't working that job because it's your passion. That's not always true, but a lot of the time it is. If you're a teenager or even a college student, you're just trying to find a job that gives you some money. And so that is why that job has power over you. It's not a passion for you. It's not something that you feel you absolutely must do. It's you're there and you're willing to do the things your boss tells you because at the end of the day, you'll get paid because of it. Fourth is expertise. And so power derives from the power holder's specific skills or expertise. So in other words, someone has a certain set of skills that because they hold those skills, they can influence you, or you will put your trust in that person and do the things that they say because of the expertise that they have. A good example of that would be a doctor. Generally, if you're going to a doctor, you're doing so because you trust their input or you trust their level of expertise. And so when a doctor tells you something, you are willing to trust them and do that thing that they say because of the skills that they have or the education that they have. Lastly, power can come from coercion. And this is where power springs from the power holder's ability to punish or penalize others. In other words, I have power over you because there is some kind of threat that hangs over your head that if you don't do the thing that I say, you will receive some kind of punishment or penalty. And so a good example of that would be the police. You don't do what the police say or you don't follow the law, well, there's suddenly a repercussion there, and that repercussion could take the form of being arrested. Let's finish up by looking at this idea of legitimacy and trying to look at why it is important to power. So first off, what is legitimacy? Well, legitimacy is the quality of being accepted as an authority. In other words, it is all well and good for you to stand up in the middle of a room and say, I have power over you. But no one's really going to buy that unless you have legitimacy of some kind. So why is legitimacy important to power? Well, it's one thing to have power, but like with the example I just gave you, in order for that power to be legitimate, it must be accepted by the people. So, for example, people accept that you were fairly elected as a politician, or that you have some kind of expertise or a doctor, or that you are someone worth following. So in other words, this goes back to those sources of power that I just talked about. Those sources of power give you legitimacy. And that legitimacy means that people will then defer to your power or defer to your decisions and will therefore curb their behavior based on the things that you say or that you want. For a government, and this is important, for government, when the power of the government is recognized as legitimate, the government has sovereignty. So that is an important term for us and one that you definitely want to write down here. So when a government has legitimacy and is recognized as having legitimate power over its people, that government is recognized as sovereign. All right, so that wraps up our set of notes here. Now we went over this note template in class. So what you should do now is go back and review your notes. Make sure that you have everything that you need to answer that essential question. If you don't, you might want to jump around and rewatch some of the parts of this video. Once you've done that, go ahead and jot down any questions in the margins that you may have. What maybe do you want to know more about? What maybe are you confused about? What holes or things do you see within the things I've talked about, or maybe disagreements do you have with the things I've talked about? Is there a source of power that I left out? Put questions about those things in the margins. And then lastly, and most importantly, go to that last section and summarize these notes in 2 to 3 sentences, and do so in a way that answers that essential question that we started these notes with. I will see you guys tomorrow, where we will take our quiz over these notes. We'll talk about them. I'll answer those questions, and I'll make sure that we're all on the same page. Thanks, and have a good night.